So to finish off this little Donkey Kong trilogy that I totally didn't plan at first, but I ended up deciding to do it at the last minute, let's take a look at Donkey Kong Donkey Kong 3, released in 1983, which actually came out only months after Mario Brothers. We're still in that pre-console era of Nintendo. And even though it's a sequel to Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Jr., this plays absolutely nothing like those games. It's all action and no platforming. Well, very little platforming. And we've also got a new protagonist. Jumpman's not in this game, and DK Jr. is not in the game either. Donkey Kong's back, he's mad as hell, and he's wreaking havoc for absolutely no reason. And I'm not gonna lie, this version of Donkey Kong is an absolute menace. But before I talk about why Donkey Kong is a menace, and before I get too far ahead, let's talk about this new protagonist I mentioned a minute ago. As I mentioned before, Mario is not in this game because he already starred in his own game months before this game came out. As I mentioned in my DK Jr. video, I'm pretty sure that Nintendo was finished with Mario and Donkey Kong's rivalry back in 1982. And they wanted to move on and make Mario and his brother a part of their own game, and then just leave Donkey Kong to wreak havoc on somebody else's property. Which brings me into this game's story, starring the forgotten Nintendo character named Stanley. Stanley makes his first appearance in a Game & Watch game called Greenhouse. I actually haven't even talked about the Game & Watch systems on my channel before, so it does give me somewhat of a brief opportunity to talk about one of the games that Nintendo released for the Game & Watch systems, and that is Greenhouse in question, which sets up a basis for what Donkey Kong 3 is. The premise for Greenhouse is very simple. Stanley is a bug exterminator who is just trying to protect his flowers from a bunch of pests. To do that, he uses his spray gun. As I mentioned before, this ties into the story of Donkey Kong 3. Donkey Kong breaks into Stanley's greenhouse and goes to hang in the rafters, where he stirs up nests of bugs, which will destroy Stanley's flowers in revenge. Armed with a sprayer, Stanley must destroy the bees and chase Donkey Kong away before he eats all 5 of his flowers. Wait, Donkey Kong's eating the flowers? Not that the story really matters all that much, but it just goes to show how much of a troll the original Donkey Kong really was. Like, dude is a menace, he will not leave people alone. Dude already has a bunch of bugs to deal with already, but then Stanley's gotta deal with Donkey Kong's big furry butt. DK's out here teaching his son how to be a menace, and DK Jr. is not even in this game. The gameplay is simplistic, probably debatably even more so than Donkey Kong and DK Jr. It's an action game, it's somewhat of a platformer still, and it also is somewhat of a shooter. A level begins with Donkey Kong hitting the hives, and then the level begins. DK is hanging on 2 vines, and the goal is to shoot Donkey Kong up the vines until he reaches the top, which will send him into the next level. Or you could probably say the next screen or the next greenhouse. But while you're doing that, remember when I say that DK hits the beehives, which sends out a bunch of insects that you have to attack while you're trying to get Donkey Kong out of here? So you've actually got a few things to worry about. The main priority is to get Donkey Kong out of the greenhouse, but you have to make sure that you don't get attacked by insects as they try and steal your flowers away from you. On the other hand, if you only focus on the insects, DK will eventually slide his way down the vines that he's hanging on. Music actually starts playing to warn you that you have to start shooting Donkey Kong, otherwise he's going to let go of the vines, drop down on Stanley and kill him. I actually didn't even know this was possible until now as I'm recording this. I even deliberately recorded myself just focusing on the insects just to see what would happen if Donkey Kong were to let go of the vines. Somehow I thought it would be more gruesome than it turned out to be. Like, I could see DK doing to Stanley what Hulk did to Loki at the end of the Avengers. Or absolutely just slamming his fist down on him like Kingpin did in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. But it turns out that's not even the most gruesome death animation in the game. Because if Stanley gets attacked by one of the insects, a whole army of insects will swarm Stanley's body and devour him. There is one power-up that Stanley can get in the game, and that is the Super Sprayer, which probably speaks for itself as a super-powered insecticide. And it could take out one of the enemies that are actually unkillable with just the standard sprayer. There's 3 greenhouses. You start off in the blue one, and then you make your way to the yellow one. Once you finish the yellow one, that's the end of round 1. When you enter round 2, you get to the gray greenhouse. You might be familiar with this system of round progression, as this is the same type of progression that Nintendo used in DK and DK Jr. The only difference now is that there's only 3 levels. And as usual with each passing round, the difficulty gradually spikes. In the case of DK3, this means an increase in insects and different insect types that are even stronger and more durable than other insects from previous rounds. Now apparently there are different insect types that I haven't seen because I didn't care to get past round 3. But apparently there's new insect types that appear after round 11 or round 12 or something like that. And I didn't really record any of that because I just did not have the patience to get to round 12 because just like Donkey Kong and just like Donkey Kong Jr., I really didn't care about this type of progression system. Don't get me wrong, I definitely see the appeal. It's an arcade game. They're all arcade games and they follow the same premise. At the end of the day, you're playing the game to see how high your score can get, to see how far you can go. But with this Donkey Kong trilogy, I really just didn't care about that. This is not a jab at the game, and this is really not a bad thing. I really just didn't feel like playing all of these levels over and over and over again until I got to a certain point. I really can't say that the game is fun enough to where I want to continue playing it over and over again, but overall I still think it's a pretty fun game. I do like that this game is a combination of being a platformer and a shooter, and I think this game is one of the first of its kind to do that. And I don't think there was a lot of games that were blending genres back then. You've got plenty of platformer shooters nowadays, but back then? And the more I look at this game, the more it kind of reminds me of Galaxian and Galaga a little bit. Or really just any shooter that you could think of that came out around that time. Also, before I forget, once you get to the yellow greenhouse and you finally defeat Donkey Kong, he gets a beehive over his head and they just maul on his face, and you love to see it. You love to see the menace get brought down. I do wish that there would have been some sort of animation where Stanley drags DK in a net or something and just tosses his big furry butt out of the window or something. Would have added to the cartoony nature of the Donkey Kong trilogy. As for Stanley, this is a character that time just completely forgot about, and unless you play this game, you probably won't even know that this character exists. I believe the first time I've ever seen this character was in Super Smash Bros. Melee, as Stanley is one of the trophies that you can collect in the game. Speaking of Super Smash Bros. Melee, Mr. Game & Watch actually uses a sprayer similar to Stanley's. He also makes various minor appearances in the Game & Watch Gallery series and the WarioWare series. And he's one of the spirits in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. I also consider Stanley to be one of the most regular protagonists in Nintendo history, because at the end of the day, he just wants to protect the plants and get rid of bugs. I feel like the world actually needs guys like Stanley around. Just an ordinary, friendly neighborhood bug exterminator. Hey, you got a bug infestation? Call Stanley, the bug guy. He'll protect your plants from pests and monkeys. I don't know, at this point I'm just giving a regular forgotten Nintendo character too much credit. But as far as major game appearances, Donkey Kong 3 is really the only game where Stanley really shines. But I think that's all I really have to say about this game. And this concludes the original Donkey Kong trilogy. Thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I will see you again in the next video. Have a blessed day.